The sound of rain tapping against the window was the only noise in the house as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my cup of coffee. The liquid had long gone cold, much like my marriage, but I didn't notice. My mind was too busy replaying the conversation I'd overheard the night before, one that still echoed in my ears like a haunting melody I couldn't shake. Anna, my wife of 8 years, had been on the phone when I walked in from the garage. It was late, and I didn't want to disturb her, so I quietly set my things down, planning to sneak upstairs and call it a night. But then I heard her laugh, a soft, secretive sound that stopped me in my tracks. There was something in that laugh, something I hadn't heard in a long time. It was the kind of laugh you share with someone special, someone who makes your heart race. I should have walked away. I should have ignored it, gone upstairs and pretended that everything was fine. But curiosity got the better of me. So I inched closer to the doorway, standing just out of sight, my breath held tight in my chest. "So, when do I get to see you again?" she whispered, her voice dripping with anticipation. My stomach churned. I had never heard her talk like that before, not even with me. The playful tone, the way her words seemed to caress the person on the other end of the line, it all felt wrong. I waited, hoping, praying that this was some sort of misunderstanding. "Last night was incredible," she continued, and the knot in my stomach tightened. "I can't stop thinking about it. About you." My heart dropped into my stomach. There was no mistaking what I was hearing. The woman I had loved for years, the one I trusted more than anyone else in the world, was having an affair. I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching the scene unfold like a bad dream. I know, but it's complicated. I can't just walk away. Not yet anyway," she murmured, her voice softening, as if trying to soothe the person on the other end of the line. There was a pause, and then she added, "Soon, I promise." I couldn't listen anymore. I backed away from the doorway, trying to keep my footsteps light despite the rage boiling inside me. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions: anger, betrayal, disbelief. How could she do this to me? To us? I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, trying to make sense of it all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Anna with someone else, smiling, laughing, touching him the way she used to touch me. It made me sick to my stomach, but I couldn't stop imagining it, couldn't stop the torrent of questions swirling in my mind. How long had this been going on? Who was he? What did he have that I didn't? As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth, all of it. No more hiding, no more pretending that everything was okay. I deserved answers, and I was going to get them. But first, I had to keep my cool. I couldn't let Anna know that I had overheard her conversation. Not yet. I needed time to gather my thoughts, to figure out my next move, so I'd play along, act like nothing was wrong, all the while watching her every move. The day passed in a blur. Anna was her usual self, cheerful, attentive, the perfect wife. But now, every smile she flashed in my direction felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I couldn't help but wonder if she was thinking about him, whoever he was, whenever she looked at me. That evening, I finally managed to get some time alone. Anna was out running errands, or so she said, and I took the opportunity to search her things. It felt wrong, invasive, but I had to know. I had to be sure. I started with her phone, but it was locked with a passcode I didn't know. That in itself was suspicious. She'd never been secretive about her phone before. Next, I rifled through her purse, finding nothing but the usual: a wallet, some makeup, and a few receipts. My frustration grew as I searched the house, coming up empty-handed. It wasn't until I was sitting back at the kitchen table, contemplating my next move, that I noticed her laptop. She rarely used it, preferring her phone or tablet for most things, but it was worth a shot. With shaky hands, I opened it and typed in the password we'd agreed on years ago. To my surprise, it worked. The laptop opened to her email, and I quickly scanned through the messages, looking for anything suspicious. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Work emails, newsletters, the usual. But then I saw it. An email from an unfamiliar address, with the subject line, "Last night." My heart pounded as I clicked on it, the contents loading slowly, almost tauntingly. The email was short, just a few lines, but it was enough. Enough to confirm what I already knew in my heart. Hey, gorgeous. I can't stop thinking about last night. You were incredible. I can't wait to see you again. Let me know when you're free. M. There it was. The proof I needed. The undeniable truth that Anna had betrayed me. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring as tears welled up in my eyes. How could she do this? How could she throw away everything we'd built together for some fling? But as much as it hurt, the pain quickly gave way to something else. Anger. I was furious. Furious at her for cheating, furious at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. But most of all, I was furious at this M for thinking he could waltz into my life and take what was mine. I slammed the laptop shut, my mind racing. I needed to confront her, but not yet. Not until I had a plan. Not until I knew exactly how I was going to make them both pay for what they'd done. And so, I waited. Waited for her to come home. Waited for the right moment to confront her with the truth. All the while, the anger inside me simmered, building, growing stronger with each passing minute. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I had been betrayed, yes. But I wasn't going to be the victim. Not this time. The next few days were a masterclass in deception on my part. I had never thought of myself as a particularly good actor, but the anger and hurt I was feeling made it easy to slip into the role of an unsuspecting husband. I smiled when I needed to, laughed when it was expected, and kept my voice steady even as my heart raged inside my chest. But every time I looked at Anna, every time she touched me, a fresh wave of revulsion crashed over me. It took everything I had not to recoil from her touch. She had no idea. None at all. I watched her closely, scrutinizing every move she made, every word she spoke, looking for signs of guilt or hesitation. But Anna was as cool as ever, her mask firmly in place. She went about her day as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just torn my world apart with her betrayal. If anything, she seemed even more affectionate than usual, which only fueled my suspicions further. It was as if she was overcompensating, trying to cover up her tracks with a facade of marital bliss. But I wasn't fooled. Not anymore. The email I had found was proof enough that something was going on, but I needed more. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal, and I was going to find out, no matter what it took. I started by watching her patterns, noting when she left the house, when she returned, and how she behaved during those times. It wasn't hard to see that something was off. She was spending more time away from home, using excuses that were flimsy at best. She would claim she was meeting a friend for coffee or running errands, but when I offered to join her, she'd quickly decline, saying she needed some me time. Me time, my ass. On one such day, when she claimed she had to attend a late-night meeting for work, I decided to follow her. I knew where her office was, so I waited until she left the house and then trailed her from a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. She drove right past her office, not even slowing down, and headed toward the other side of town. I kept my distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to turn around, to stop before I saw something I couldn't unsee. But I was driven by a dark curiosity, a need to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She pulled into the parking lot of a small, nondescript motel. My heart lurched as I watched her park the car and step out, glancing around as if to make sure she hadn't been followed. My breath caught in my throat as she walked to one of the rooms, her pace quick and purposeful. She knocked on the door, and within seconds it opened to reveal a man standing in the doorway. I didn't need to see more. The look on her face, the way she practically melted into his arms as he pulled her inside, was enough to confirm everything. This was the man, M, the one she'd been sneaking around with behind my back, the one who had taken my place in her life, in her bed. My vision blurred with a mix of rage and despair as I watched them disappear into the room, the door clicking shut behind them. I felt like I was going to be sick. My body trembled with the urge to storm over there, to kick the door down and confront them both. But I forced myself to stay put. There would be time for that later. For now, I needed to think clearly, to plan my next move. I parked my car a few blocks away, far enough that it wouldn't be seen but close enough that I could keep an eye on the motel. Then I waited. I wasn't sure how long I sat there staring at that door, my mind a swirling vortex of anger, pain, and confusion. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, every second feeling like an eternity. I imagined what was happening inside that room. The thought of Anna with another man, touching him, kissing him, drove me to the brink of madness. Finally, after what felt like hours, the door opened again, and Anna emerged, her hair tousled and her cheeks flushed. She looked around nervously before quickly making her way back to her car. The man, M, stood in the doorway, watching her go with a smug, satisfied look on his face. It took every ounce of willpower I had not to leap out of the car and wipe that smug look off his face permanently, but I knew that now wasn't the time. I couldn't let them know that I had discovered their secret. Not yet. I watched as Anna drove off, her car disappearing into the distance. I waited until she was out of sight before turning my attention back to the man. He was still standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, as if he didn't have a care in the world. My blood boiled as I took in his appearance. Tall, well-built, with a head full of thick dark hair and a cocky smirk plastered across his face. This was the man who had stolen my wife, who had made her forget about everything we had built together. And I hated him for it. I needed to know who he was, where he lived, what he did for a living. I needed to know everything about him so I could destroy him piece by piece. But first, I needed to find out how deep this betrayal went. How long had it been going on? How many times had she met him here, at the seedy motel, while I was at home, blissfully unaware? The thought of it made me want to scream, to hit something, anything, to release the pent-up rage that was threatening to consume me. But I held it together, barely. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures of the man, making sure to get a clear shot of his face. Then I drove away, my mind already racing with ideas of how to use this information. When I got home, Anna was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. She smiled at me as I walked in, and the sight of her made my stomach turn. How could she act so normal, so loving after what she had just done? I felt like I was losing my mind, like I was living in some twisted nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. "Hey, honey," she greeted me, her voice warm and cheerful. "How was your day?" I forced a smile, pushing down the bile that was rising in my throat. "It was fine," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Just the usual." She nodded, turning her attention back to the stove. "Dinner will be ready in a few minutes. I hope you're hungry." Hungry? The thought of eating anything right now made me want to vomit. But I couldn't let her see that, not yet. So I nodded, sitting down at the table as if nothing was wrong, as if I wasn't on the verge of exploding from the inside out. As I watched her move around the kitchen, I couldn't help but notice how beautiful she still was. Her long dark hair, the way it cascaded down her back, the way her smile lit up the room. But now, that beauty felt like a lie. A cruel, deceitful lie that had been hiding the truth from me for God knows how long. The next few days were excruciating. I knew what she was doing, where she was going, but I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more proof, more information before I could make my move. So I followed her whenever she left the house, trailing her to the motel, watching as she met with the man over and over again. Each time it felt like another dagger in my heart, but I forced myself to endure it. I had to. It wasn't long before I had enough evidence. Photos, emails, even a few recorded conversations I managed to get by placing a bug in her car. I felt dirty, like a stalker, but I didn't care. This was my marriage, my life, and she had thrown it all away for some cheap thrills. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal before I could confront her, before I could make her feel a fraction of the pain she had caused me. The night I decided to confront her, I waited until she came back from one of her late-night meetings. She walked in, smiling as she always did, as if she had just come back from a normal day at the office, not from cheating on her husband. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched her walk towards me, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. "Hey," she said, leaning in to kiss me, but I stepped back, stopping her in her tracks. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice cold, the anger barely contained. She blinked, taken aback by my tone. "I told you, I had a meeting," she replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "A meeting?" I repeated, my voice rising. "At a motel?" Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment she was speechless. Then, as the realization hit her, her expression shifted to one of panic. "Jake, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off, my rage finally boiling over. "Explain? Explain what, Anna? That you've been cheating on me? That you've been sneaking around behind my back with some guy you met at a fucking motel? How do you explain that?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I grabbed her arm, dragging her to the table where I had laid out all the evidence. Photos, emails, recordings, everything. Her face drained of color as she took in the sight, her hands trembling as she reached for the photos. "I know everything," I said, my voice low and deadly. "I know about him, about the motel, about all of it." Anna's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at me, her lower lip trembling. "Jake, please, it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I shouted, unable to hold back any longer. "What the hell else could it be, Anna? You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and you expect me to believe it's not what I think?" As she broke down then, tears streaming down her face as she tried to reach out to me. But I stepped back, disgusted by the sight of her, by the thought of her touching me after being with him. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her voice choked with emotion. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't mean to hurt you." "Didn't mean to hurt me," I echoed, my voice shaking with fury. "You destroyed me, Anna. You destroyed us. How could you do this? How could you betray me like this?" "I was lonely," she cried, her voice desperate. "You were always so busy with work, with everything else. I needed someone, Jake. I needed someone to be there for me, to make me feel wanted." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was blaming me just as I had feared she would. Blaming me for her betrayal, for her selfishness. I felt the anger surge through me again, but this time it was mixed with a deep, aching sadness. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice hollow. "You're saying that I'm the reason you cheated on me?" "No!" she cried, shaking her head. "No, it's not your fault. It's mine. I'm the one who messed up. I'm the one who—" "You're damn right it's your fault," I cut in, my voice cold. "You're the one who decided to throw away our marriage, our life, for some fling. You're the one who destroyed everything." She crumpled to the floor then, her body shaking with sobs as she buried her face in her hands. I watched her, my heart heavy with the weight of her betrayal. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but I knew it would be a lie. Nothing would ever be okay again. "I want you out," I said finally, my voice emotionless. "Pack your things and get out of my house. I can't even look at you right now." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "Jake, please don't do this. We can work through this. We can fix it." "There's nothing to fix," I replied coldly. "You broke us, Anna. You broke me, and now you need to leave." She started to protest, but I turned and walked away, unable to bear the sight of her any longer. I went upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and shut the door behind me, leaning against it as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Anna was gone. She was out of my life, just like that. The woman I had loved, the woman I had shared my life with for 8 years, was nothing more than a stranger to me now. And I had no one to blame but her. But the anger that had fueled me for so long wasn't enough to numb the pain. I sank down onto the bed, burying my face in my hands as the tears finally came. Everything I had known, everything I had believed in, was gone. And all I was left with was the cold, hard truth of her betrayal. The days that followed Anna's departure were a blur of anger and cold calculation. My life had been shattered, and I knew I couldn't just sit back and let her get away with it. The rage inside me was too fierce, too overwhelming to be quelled by simple confrontation. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the pain she had inflicted on me, to experience the same kind of devastation that had become my daily reality. Anna thought she could just walk away, that she could leave and start a new life without consequence. She was wrong. Dead wrong. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I had always been the calm, level-headed one, the man who kept things together. But now, I was a man with nothing to lose and a deep thirst for revenge. The first thing I did was freeze all our joint accounts. I didn't care where she was or what she was doing. I made sure she wouldn't have access to a single dime of our money. She had left with nothing but a suitcase, thinking she could come back for more later. But when she tried to access our funds, she'd find nothing but locked doors. The woman who had cheated on me would learn quickly that she had nothing left to her name, not as long as I had control over it. Next, I went through every detail of our financial life, looking for anything I could use against her. There were credit cards in both our names, investments, savings, everything we had built together over the years. I took meticulous notes, gathering all the information I needed to legally cut her off from every single one. It wasn't enough to just freeze the accounts. I wanted her to be destitute, to realize just how much she had thrown away for her affair. I knew she wouldn't expect me to be this ruthless, and that thought fueled me even more. I contacted our insurance company and made some changes there too. All of our policies, from health insurance to the life insurance we had taken out together, were altered to remove her as a beneficiary. Anna wouldn't see a single cent if something happened to me, and she'd be left scrambling if she needed anything in the meantime. I even took her off the car insurance, knowing full well that she'd be driving without coverage until she figured it out. It didn't stop there. I went after the things that mattered to her most. Anna had always been proud of her social circle, the friendships she maintained so carefully over the years. But these friends had no idea what kind of person she truly was. They saw her as the perfect wife, the one who had it all together. I decided it was time to reveal her true colors. I started with the most influential couple in our group, Mark and Sarah. They were the ones who hosted all the gatherings, who kept everyone connected. They were also the biggest gossips I knew, and if anyone could spread the word quickly, it was them. I invited them over for dinner, keeping up the charade of being the devastated but resilient husband. After a few drinks, I let it slip, casually, as if it pained me to say it, that Anna had been unfaithful. The shock on their faces was almost satisfying enough to dull the pain. Almost. I didn't want to believe it, I said, my voice cracking just the right amount. But I found out, the hard way. She's been seeing someone behind my back for months, maybe even longer. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as her eyes filled with sympathy. Mark shook his head, clearly uncomfortable, but I knew that as soon as they left my house, the news would spread like wildfire. I made sure to give them all the sordid details, enough to make Anna look like the villain she was, but not so much that it seemed like I was trying to smear her name. It was a delicate balance, one I played to perfection. It didn't take long for the phone calls and texts to start coming in. Anna's friends were in shock, disbelief, but more than that, they were angry. Angry that she had deceived them, that she had pretended to be something she wasn't. They distanced themselves from her almost immediately, and within days, she was an outcast in her own social circle. But I wasn't done yet. Anna had always been career-oriented, even though she had taken some time off work to focus on our marriage. She was planning to get back into the workforce, something she had been talking about for months. But I knew how much her reputation meant to her, how much she prided herself on being respected in her field. I couldn't let her go back to work without making sure everyone knew exactly who she was. I reached out to a few of her former colleagues, people who were still in the industry, and let them know about the troubles in our marriage. Again, I played the role of the heartbroken husband, careful not to sound bitter, but just concerned enough to make them curious. It wasn't long before they started piecing things together on their own. The whispers would spread, and soon enough, anyone who might consider hiring Anna would know exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. Her career, like everything else, was about to go up in flames. As I watched all of this unfold, a dark sense of satisfaction took hold of me. Anna had destroyed my life, and now I was returning the favor, piece by piece. But even as I relished in my revenge, there was a part of me that couldn't ignore the emptiness that came with it. I had loved this woman once, had built a life with her, and now I was systematically tearing it all down. It was a hollow victory, one that left me feeling more alone than ever. But there was no turning back now. I had set the wheels in motion, and the only thing left to do was watch as her world crumbled around her. Anna had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. Still, even as I continued to dismantle her life, there was one more piece of revenge that I was saving. Something that would cut deeper than anything else, that would make her realize just how much she had lost. But for that, I needed time. And when the moment was right, I would deliver the final blow. For now, I focused on the destruction at hand. As the days turned into weeks, I heard bits and pieces of what was happening in Anna's life. She had tried to reach out to a few of our mutual friends, only to be met with cold shoulders and avoidance. The invitations to social events stopped coming, and the calls from potential employers dried up. She was slowly being isolated, just as I had planned, and with each new report, I felt a twisted sense of justice. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I knew that to truly destroy her, I needed to hit her where it hurt the most. Her pride. Anna had always been vain, always cared about appearances. So I took the next step in my plan. I leaked our dirty laundry to the wider community. I started with anonymous posts on social media, carefully crafted messages that hinted at her infidelity, her betrayal. I used fake accounts, made sure nothing could be traced back to me. The posts were shared in local groups, places where people knew us, where our names carried weight. It wasn't long before the rumors started to spread, growing with each retelling. Anna's face, once the picture of confidence and poise, was now a mask of anxiety and paranoia. I imagined her checking her phone obsessively, reading the comments, watching her reputation disintegrate in real time. She would have no idea who was behind it, no clue that it was me orchestrating the entire downfall. I could only imagine the desperation she must have felt, knowing that her life was unraveling and being powerless to stop it. She would try to fight back, I was sure of it, but every attempt would only dig her deeper into the hole I had created. And still, it wasn't enough. There was one more thing I needed to do, the final piece of my revenge that would ensure Anna never forgot the price of her betrayal. But that would have to wait. For now, I would let her squirm, let her feel the full weight of everything she had lost. And when the time was right, I would deliver the final blow, the one that would leave her broken, just as she had left me. Even with everything I had done to Anna, there was still a gnawing sense of incompleteness. She wasn't the only one responsible for the destruction of my life. There was another player in this twisted drama, one who had been there from the start, the man who had wormed his way into my marriage, who had taken what was mine and destroyed it with his greed and selfishness. The faceless bastard who thought he could sneak into my life and get away with it. It was time to bring him down too. I started with the basics. I had his name from the emails and the images I'd taken of him at the motel. From there, it didn't take long to dig up more information about him. I used every tool at my disposal, from social media to online background checks. What I found only fueled my rage. His name was Michael, just as smug as his face suggested. He was a few years younger than me, with a cushy job at a tech firm downtown. He wasn't married, no kids, which meant he had no idea what it meant to truly love someone, to build a life with them. He was just a playboy, flitting from one woman to the next, never caring about the damage he left in his wake. I found pictures of him on social media, always smiling, always surrounded by women. He looked like the kind of guy who thought he was invincible, who thought he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. But he had no idea what was coming. I learned that Michael was well liked at his job, even admired by his colleagues for his charisma and easygoing nature. But I also found that his success was built on a house of cards. He wasn't as competent as he appeared. There were rumors of projects he'd screwed up, deals he'd almost tanked, all of which had been covered up by his charm and the goodwill of his superiors. He was skating on thin ice, and all it would take was one push to send him crashing through. So that's exactly what I set out to do. I created an anonymous email account and started contacting people at his company, posing as an insider who was concerned about Michael's behavior. I hinted at his affair with Anna, suggesting that his personal life was starting to interfere with his work, that his judgment was compromised. I planted the seed of doubt, knowing that in the cutthroat world of corporate politics, it wouldn't take much for that doubt to grow into suspicion. Next, I reached out to a few of his colleagues directly, using fake accounts on LinkedIn and other professional networks. I crafted messages that played on their existing grievances with Michael, stoking the fires of jealousy and resentment. I made sure to mention his recent distractions, implying that he was no longer fit to lead the projects he was assigned to. It wasn't long before I started hearing back. Rumors were spreading within the company, and Michael's position was beginning to weaken. But I wasn't satisfied with just undermining his career. I wanted to hit him where it would hurt the most, where his arrogance and ego would feel the sting. I knew from my research that Michael was deeply invested in his social life, in the image he projected to the world. He thrived on attention, on being the center of every gathering. So I decided to take that away from him too. I started attending some of the same bars and clubs he frequented, always keeping a low profile, always staying just out of sight. I listened to the conversations, watched how people reacted to him. It didn't take long to find out who his closest friends were, the ones who looked up to him, who fed his ego with their admiration. I approached them subtly, casually slipping into conversations, always careful to mask my intentions. I mentioned that I had heard rumors about Michael, that there was talk of him being involved with a married woman, that his reckless behavior was starting to affect those around him. I made sure to phrase it in a way that made me seem concerned, almost sympathetic, as if I were just trying to look out for them. At first there was skepticism, but as I continued to weave my narrative, the doubts began to take root. His friends started to pull away, their conversations with him becoming more guarded, their praise more restrained. The more isolated he became, the more desperate he grew to hold on to his carefully constructed image. But the final blow came one night when I saw my chance to confront him directly. It was a Friday evening, and I knew Michael would be at one of his favorite spots, a trendy bar downtown where the drinks were expensive, and the atmosphere was pretentious. I had been there before, always staying in the background, watching him laugh and flirt, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing around him. But that night, I was ready. I waited until he was alone, separated from his group of friends as he ordered another drink at the bar. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached him, but I forced myself to stay calm, to keep the rage bubbling inside me under control. "Michael, right?" I said, my voice steady as I stood next to him. He glanced over at me, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Yeah, do I know you?" "You could say that," I replied, leaning in closer. "You've been seeing my wife." His eyes widened, and for a moment he was too shocked to respond. But then he quickly composed himself, a smug smile creeping onto his face. "Look, man, I didn't know she was married. It's not like that." "Save it," I cut him off, my voice cold as ice. "I know exactly what it's like. I know everything about you, Michael, and I'm going to make sure you regret every single second of it." He opened his mouth to speak, but I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses. I leaned in even closer, lowering my voice to a whisper. "Your job? It's hanging by a thread. Your friends? They're starting to see you for who you really are. And your reputation? It's about to go down the drain." He stared at me, the smugness fading from his face as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. "You're bluffing," he said, though there was a tremor in his voice. "Try me," I replied, my eyes boring into his. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, his drink forgotten on the bar. As I left the building, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also a deep, gnawing emptiness. The confrontation had been everything I wanted, everything I needed to say, but it didn't erase the pain, didn't undo the damage that had been done. Over the next few days, I kept tabs on Michael, watching as his life began to unravel. The rumors at work escalated, and he was quietly demoted from his position, forced to take on menial tasks that were far beneath him. His friends distanced themselves even further, leaving him to drink alone in the bars he once ruled. But the final blow came when I reached out to his boss directly, using the evidence I had gathered to expose him for what he truly was. I sent the emails, the photos, everything that painted a clear picture of Michael as a reckless, irresponsible employee whose personal life was bleeding into his professional one. It wasn't long before he was fired, his reputation in tatters, his career prospects in ruins. He had lost everything, just as I had intended. The day I heard the news, I sat in my empty house, staring at the wall as the reality of what I had done finally began to sink in. I had destroyed him, just as he had destroyed my marriage, my life. But even as I reveled in the satisfaction of my revenge, there was a part of me that felt hollow, as if the victory was somehow tainted by the darkness that had consumed me. I knew that I had crossed a line, that I had become something I didn't recognize, something I wasn't sure I could ever come back from. But there was no going back now. I had done what I had to do. And now, all that was left was to live with the consequences. Michael was finished, Anna was ruined, and I was left alone with nothing but the ashes of what once was. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized that even in victory, I had lost something far more precious than I could ever regain. The day I had been dreading finally arrived. After weeks of silence, Anna reached out to me, asking if we could talk. I knew what was coming. She had been battered and bruised by the fallout from my revenge, and now she was ready to pick up the pieces. But there was no satisfaction in that thought, only a deep, weary resignation. The battle was over, and it was time to face the consequences of everything that had happened. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, far enough away from prying eyes that we could have a private conversation. As I walked in, I saw her sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked different, pale, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. The confident, radiant woman I once knew was gone, replaced by someone who looked as broken as I felt. I approached the table and she glanced up, her eyes meeting mine. There was no smile, no warmth, just a weary acknowledgement that this conversation was long overdue. I sat down across from her, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. "Jake," she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. I could feel the tension in my jaw, the way my hands curled into fists under the table. Seeing her like this, vulnerable and defeated, stirred something inside me that I didn't want to acknowledge. "I don't even know where to start," she continued, her eyes dropping to the table. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, about what I did, and what you did. It's all such a mess." "Yes," I replied, my voice flat. "It is." She looked up at me again, her eyes searching mine for something. Maybe understanding, maybe forgiveness. But I had none left to give. "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I betrayed you in the worst possible way, and I've paid for it. God, have I paid for it?" She paused, taking a shaky breath. "But I need to know. Was it all worth it to you, destroying me like that? Was it enough?" I didn't answer right away. Her question hung in the air, echoing in the hollow space where my heart used to be. I wanted to tell her that yes, it had been worth it, that seeing her suffer was the only thing that kept me going. But the truth was far more complicated than that. "I don't know," I finally said, my voice low. "I thought it would be. I thought making you pay for what you did would make me feel better, make me feel like I had some control over the situation. But now, I don't know anymore." She nodded as if she understood exactly what I meant. "I get that," she said softly. "I've had a lot of time to think, Jake. About us, about where it all went wrong. And I realize now that I was wrong. About everything." I felt a surge of bitterness rise up inside me, the anger that had fueled me for so long bubbling to the surface. "You're damn right you were wrong," I snapped, unable to keep the venom out of my voice. "You destroyed our marriage, Anna. You destroyed me. And now you're sitting here, what? Expecting me to just forgive and forget?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Jake. I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to understand that I'm not the only one who destroyed us. We both did." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to argue, to throw all the blame back at her. But deep down, I knew she was right. I had played my part in the collapse of our marriage, long before the affair ever happened. I had been so consumed with my own life, my own responsibilities, that I hadn't seen the cracks forming in our relationship. But that didn't make what she did any less painful. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Where do we go from here?" She wiped at her eyes, taking a deep breath before answering. "We need to talk about the divorce," she said quietly. I think it's the only way forward. For both of us." I wasn't surprised. We had been heading toward this moment for a long time, ever since the day I discovered her betrayal. But hearing the word out loud, divorce, made it all feel so final, so irreversible. "Yeah," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I figured as much." She nodded again, her hands trembling as she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," she said, sliding the folder across the table to me. "These are the papers. I didn't know how else to do this. I stared at the folder, the words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," staring back at me in bold, black letters. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold in front of me. This was it, the end of everything we had built together, the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I opened the folder and skimmed through the papers. It was all there, the division of assets, the arrangements for the house, the details of how our lives would be split down the middle. It was all so clinical, so detached from the reality of the pain we were both feeling. "I didn't ask for much," Anna said, her voice breaking the silence. "I just want to get this over with, Jake. I want us both to be able to move on." I looked up at her, meeting her gaze for the first time since I had sat down. There was a sadness in her eyes, a deep, aching regret that mirrored my own. For a moment, I wondered what might have been different if we had made different choices, if we had fought harder to keep our marriage intact. But it was too late for that now. "Okay," I said, my voice resigned. "I'll sign them." She let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her features. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Jake." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I pulled a pen from my pocket and began signing the papers, each stroke of the pen feeling like a final painful goodbye to the life we had once shared. When I was done, I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. Anna stared at it for a moment, as if she couldn't quite believe it was real, before finally reaching out to take it. "It's done," I said, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. "It's over." She nodded, her hand trembling as she held the folder. "Yeah, it's over." We sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on us. There was nothing left to say, no more accusations, no more blame. Just the cold, hard reality of what our marriage had become. Finally, Anna stood up, clutching the folder to her chest like a lifeline. "I should go," she said softly. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the next steps." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I watched as she turned and walked away, her figure growing smaller and smaller until she disappeared out the door. And then, for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly, utterly alone. The divorce was just a formality now, a final step in the process of untangling our lives. But the emotional wreckage, the scars left behind by everything that had happened, would take far longer to heal, if they ever did. As I sat there in the empty cafe, the reality of what I had just done hit me with full force. I had spent so long planning my revenge, so long trying to destroy Anna and the man she had cheated with, that I hadn't stopped to think about what came next, about what my life would look like after all the dust had settled. Now, I had no choice but to face it, to face the emptiness, the loss, and the deep, aching loneliness that had been left in the wake of my actions. But as painful as it was, I knew there was no going back. The damage was done, the marriage was over, and all that was left was to pick up the pieces and figure out how to move forward. I took a deep breath, standing up and leaving the cafe. The road ahead was uncertain, and the weight of everything I had lost threatened to crush me. But somewhere, buried deep beneath the pain and the regret, there was a flicker of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to rebuild my life, to start over. But for now, all I could do was put one foot in front of the other and try to keep moving. The divorce was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that I would have to navigate alone. The days following our last conversation were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and the slow, grinding machinery of the legal system. The divorce process, though inevitable, felt like a relentless march toward finality. Every document I signed, every agreement we reached, was a step closer to severing the ties that had once bound us together. It was a strange, numbing experience, being so intimately involved in the dismantling of a life we had built together. The lawyers handled most of the logistics, the dividing of assets, the details that I couldn't bring myself to care about. The house, our savings, the cars. It was all just numbers on a page now, meaningless in the wake of everything that had happened. I let them sort it out, my only request being that I wanted the house. It wasn't out of any sentimental attachment. The place had been tainted by too many memories, too much pain. But it was a matter of principle. Something tangible that I could hold on to. Something that was still mine. Anna didn't contest it. She had already found a small apartment on the other side of town, far enough away that we wouldn't have to cross paths. She was eager to get it over with, to move on with her life. I couldn't blame her. I felt the same way. We were like two ghosts haunting the ruins of a once happy marriage, both desperate to escape the past. As the weeks dragged on, the final details of the divorce were hammered out. The lawyers exchanged documents, negotiated terms, and slowly the picture of our new lives began to take shape. It was clinical, detached, almost as if we were strangers dividing up the spoils of a failed business venture rather than a marriage. But there was one final step that couldn't be handled by lawyers. One last piece of unfinished business that we had to face together. The court required us to attend a mediation session, a last-ditch effort to ensure that everything was settled amicably, that there were no lingering issues left to fester. I dreaded it. The thought of sitting in a room with Anna rehashing the details of our failed marriage in front of a mediator felt like rubbing salt in an open wound. But it was necessary, so I steeled myself for what was to come. The day of the mediation arrived, gray and overcast, as if the weather itself was mirroring the mood. I arrived at the courthouse early, the sterile, impersonal environment adding to my sense of unease. The waiting room was sparsely populated, just a few other couples sitting in awkward silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Anna arrived a few minutes later, her expression guarded, her eyes avoiding mine as she took a seat across from me. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. We both knew why we were here, and neither of us had any illusions about what this session would accomplish. Finally, the mediator called us in, a middle-aged woman with a calm, professional demeanor. She led us into a small conference room, the walls lined with bookshelves and legal documents. We sat at a long table, the mediator taking a seat at the head, a stack of papers in front of her. "Thank you both for being here," she began, her voice measured and even. "I know this is a difficult process, but it's important that we address any outstanding issues before finalizing the divorce." I nodded, my eyes fixed on a spot on the table. Anna remained silent, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The mediator went over the basics: assets, finances, the house. We had already agreed on most of it, so there wasn't much to discuss. But then she turned to the more sensitive topics, the emotional fallout from everything that had happened. "I understand there's been some difficulty," the mediator said carefully, glancing between the two of us. "It's not uncommon in situations like this. I want to make sure that both of you feel heard, that you have the opportunity to express any concerns you might have before we move forward." Anna finally spoke, her voice quiet and shaky. "I just want to move on," she said, her eyes fixed on the table. "I don't want to drag this out any longer. I don't want to hurt Jake any more than I already have." I felt a flicker of anger at her words, but I forced it down. I had spent so long being angry, so long consumed by rage and bitterness, that it had become a part of me. But now, sitting in that sterile conference room, with nothing left to fight over, I felt empty. The mediator nodded, turning to me. "Jake, is there anything you'd like to say?" I hesitated, the words tangled in my throat. What was there to say? I had spent months tearing Anna's life apart, seeking revenge for the pain she had caused me. But now, standing at the edge of this abyss, I couldn't find the satisfaction I thought I would. All I felt was a deep, aching exhaustion. "No," I finally said, my voice hollow. "There's nothing left to say." The mediator studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. If there are no further issues, we'll move forward with the finalization of the divorce. I'll prepare the necessary documents, and you'll both receive copies to sign. Once that's done, the marriage will be legally dissolved." The words hit me like a sledgehammer, the finality of it all crashing down on me. Legally dissolved. Our marriage, our life together, would be reduced to a stack of papers, filed away in some courthouse archive. It was as if everything we had once been, everything we had built, was being erased, wiped clean as if it had never existed. The session ended quickly after that, the mediator handing us each a copy of the final agreement. Anna and I stood up, the weight of the moment pressing down on us as we prepared to go our separate ways. "Jake," Anna said softly, her voice trembling as she spoke my name. I'm sorry. For everything." I looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time in what felt like ages. There was no more anger, no more bitterness, just a deep, overwhelming sadness. She wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with, but she wasn't a monster either. She was just a person, flawed and broken, just like me. "I know," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry too." For a moment we stood there in silence, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. But there was no going back, no undoing what had been done. All we could do was move forward, alone. Anna turned and walked out of the room, the door clicking shut behind her. I stood there for a long time, the finality of it all settling over me like a heavy blanket. The divorce was done, the marriage over, but the wounds, the scars left behind by everything that had happened, would linger for a long time. As I left the courthouse, the gray clouds overhead began to part, a sliver of sunlight breaking through. It was a small, almost insignificant change, but it felt like a sign that maybe there was hope for the future, for a life beyond the pain and the betrayal. I didn't know what that future would look like. I didn't know if I would ever truly heal from what had happened. But as I walked away from the courthouse, the weight of the past slowly lifting from my shoulders, I knew one thing for certain. I had survived. And now, it was time to start living again. The finalization of the divorce marked the end of one chapter in my life, but it was also the beginning of another, one that I hadn't quite figured out how to navigate yet. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of freedom and emptiness, a sense of both relief and profound loss. I had spent so long focused on revenge, on tearing down everything that had hurt me, that I hadn't stopped to think about what would come next. Now, with Anna out of my life and the legalities settled, I was left with the daunting task of rebuilding. The house was mine, but it didn't feel like a home anymore. Every corner, every room held memories of the life I had shared with Anna, memories that now felt like ghosts haunting the space. I considered selling it, starting fresh somewhere new, but something held me back. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was a refusal to let go of the last piece of the life I had known. Or maybe it was the simple fact that I wasn't ready to face the world yet, to admit that everything had changed. So I stayed. I spent the first few days cleaning, throwing out anything that reminded me of Anna, anything that carried the weight of our shared history. It was cathartic in a way, to strip the house down to its bare bones, to make it mine and mine alone. I redecorated, rearranged the furniture, tried to make the place feel different, even if it was just a superficial change. But no matter what I did, there was no escaping the reality of what had happened. The house was still the same, and I was still the same broken man trying to piece together the remnants of my life. I went back to work, throwing myself into my job with a single-minded focus that bordered on obsession. It was easier to drown myself in tasks and deadlines than to confront the gaping hole in my life. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the way I kept to myself, the way I avoided small talk and social interactions. They gave me space, which I was grateful for, but their sympathy only reminded me of how far I had fallen. The weekends were the hardest. The quiet, the lack of distraction. It forced me to confront the loneliness that had settled over me like a fog. I tried to fill the time with hobbies, things I had once enjoyed but had let fall by the wayside during my marriage. I started running again, pushing myself to exhaustion, as if the physical pain could drown out the emotional. I picked up books, watched movies, anything to keep my mind occupied. But no matter what I did, there was always a moment, late at night, when the distractions faded, and I was left alone with my thoughts. I thought about Anna more than I wanted to admit. Not the woman she had become, not the person who had betrayed me, but the Anna I had fallen in love with. The woman who had once been my best friend, my partner, in everything. I thought about what we had lost, about the future we had once dreamed of that would never come to pass. I wondered if she thought about me too, if she lay awake at night in her new apartment, haunted by the same memories. But as much as those thoughts plagued me, there was something else too. A glimmer of hope, buried deep beneath the pain. A small tentative realization that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the story. That maybe there was still a future for me, even if it wasn't the one I had imagined. I started to make small changes, steps towards something new. I reached out to old friends, people I had lost touch with during the chaos of my marriage and its aftermath. I wasn't looking for sympathy or pity. I just needed to reconnect, to remind myself that there was still a world beyond the one I had lost. Slowly, tentatively, I started to rebuild those relationships, to let people back into my life. One of those friends was Tom, a guy I had known since college, but had drifted away from over the years. He was one of the few people who had reached out during the divorce, offering support without prying, and I finally took him up on his offer to grab a drink. It was awkward at first, catching up on the years we had missed, but there was something comforting about being with someone who knew me before everything went to hell. We started meeting up regularly just to talk, to shoot the shit like we used to. He never pushed me to talk about the divorce, never asked for details, and for that, I was grateful. It gave me the space I needed to process everything on my own terms. Slowly, I found myself opening up to him, sharing bits and pieces of what had happened, and he listened without judgment. Through Tom, I started to re-enter the world of social gatherings, something I had avoided like the plague since the divorce. He invited me to a few parties, casual get-togethers where I could be anonymous, just another face in the crowd. At first it was overwhelming, too many people, too much noise, but gradually, I found myself easing back into it. It wasn't about finding a new relationship or moving on. It was about reclaiming some semblance of normalcy, about proving to myself that I could still function in a world that didn't revolve around my pain. One evening, at one of those parties, I met someone. Her name was Emma, and she was different from anyone I had known before. She wasn't flashy or overly confident, just warm, kind, with a smile that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily, effortlessly. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people connecting on a level that felt safe. Emma wasn't a cure for what I had been through, and I wasn't looking for one. But she was a reminder that life goes on, that there are still good people out there, still possibilities waiting to be explored. We exchanged numbers, promising to meet up again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than despair. As the weeks turned into months, I started to find my footing again. It wasn't easy. There were still days when the weight of everything threatened to pull me under, when the memories came rushing back like a tidal wave. But those days grew fewer and farther between, replaced by moments of clarity, of acceptance. I learned to forgive myself for the choices I had made, the mistakes that had led me to this point. I learned to forgive Anna, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to let go of the anger that was holding me back. And in that forgiveness, I found a strange kind of peace, an understanding that life is messy, that people are flawed, and that sometimes things fall apart so that something new can grow. I didn't rush into anything with Emma. We took things slow, just getting to know each other without the baggage of my past weighing us down. There was something refreshing about it, something pure. It wasn't about filling the void left by Anna. It was about exploring a new connection, one that had the potential to be something good, something real. As my relationship with Emma grew, so did my sense of self. I started to see a future again, one that wasn't defined by what I had lost, but by what I could build. It wasn't the future I had once imagined, but maybe that was okay. Maybe it was better. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my house, I watched the sun set over the horizon, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. The air was warm, the breeze gentle, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a sense of contentment. It wasn't the fiery passion of revenge, nor the deep ache of loss. It was something quieter, more subtle. A realization that life goes on, that healing is possible, even if it takes time. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. The betrayal, the anger, the pain. They were all still there, but they no longer defined me. I had survived, and more than that, I had grown. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. It excited me. Because now, after everything I had been through, I knew that I could handle it. I knew that I could rebuild, that I could find happiness again, even if it looked different from what I had once imagined. I had been broken, but I wasn't shattered. And in the cracks, in the places where the light had seeped through, I had found something new, something worth holding on to. A new life, a new beginning, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to be happy again.